Hello, all. Welcome to this Zoom portion of our lecture. I apologize. I will not be able to use my camera. My work computer camera does not work, and I've yet to take it into IT, but I plan to at the end of the semester. I wanted, even though clearly this is not my name, I am not Courtney Reed. This is her PowerPoint. I wanted to attribute credit to her since I will be using it. Very well done. And even if you've had a chance to review it, the actual slideshow itself is very informative. I just thought I would put some provide some of my own personal examples as I kind of walk through these slides. So first, I don't think it's difficult. We have not learned about this, but I think we can easily identify the difference between positive and negative climate. But the main points to remember about this, what makes positive, you know it's a positive climate if you see teachers, adults seeking out children, if you see them smiling. So if you'll recall from our last class, I talked about my own core experiences in the classroom starting out and how I didn't smile. It led to a negative climate. But it's actually very important for our students to feel comfortable and feel like they can, not being happy, but if they see their teachers are not happy, it's going to be much more difficult for them to find joy in what's occurring in the classroom. And again, the students tend to match our affect because they're learning how to express their own emotions. So we're modeling that for them. And this also, in addition to just, our expressions and what we say, it's also the tone. Are you using a tone that is aggressive, abrasive? That can lead to a negative climate. Sadly, when I was working in Providence schools, we had a terrible issue with staff using yelling as a form of discipline, specifically support staff. And that was something I was already there, but they had me present to the TAs about this. Because what happens when all you do is yell, then that's all the kids seem to think is happening, and they never feel like they can do anything right. So if there's yelling, if there's threats, if teachers are putting hands on children a lot, not okay. If you see a teacher is always irritable, struggles to, make time for children, not a positive climate. And any teacher that teases or uses sarcasm or embarrasses children, not positive. And sometimes these things, they seem obvious, right? But it's not uncommon for them to be more implicit or subconscious, and we don't even notice that we're doing it. This is one of those situations where it can happen. I know in my setting, when I was working in a self-contained classroom, it was not uncommon for teachers to think it's okay to talk about children while they're there. And this is where some of that information can come in, thinking that they don't know, but they do, and they are attuned to us. They are curious what we're saying. And when we're thinking about effective teacher-child interactions, this is kind of an important graph. And although we'll talk about emotional and behavioral support today, all of these do tend to lead to quality interactions. The classroom is organized well, and we feel more comfortable. If there's support with new knowledge, right? Instructional support. Yeah, we'll keep going based on that. So for educators, I'd say one of the most important things we can do is just be sensitive. It's not about being nice or kind. It's about noticing and knowing your kids. If you know your students, you'll also notice when something is off about them, right? You'll know that what could be seen as a typical behavior for one student is not typical for another. So for example, and this is a little bit of a different example, but when I had a student in my classroom, um, he started on, I don't remember what medication, but a medication for ADHD. And there was obviously an immediate change in behavior, but what really was, I became sensitive to was his change in disposition. Um, he was attentive, which as a teacher, obviously that makes my job easier, but I didn't feel like he was enjoying being in school as much as he was before. And he wasn't as interested to interact with his peers as he was before. So as you know, this was something I brought to the team because I was like, you know, it's wonderful that his family has identified these needs. I'm not, you know, how do I say this to a family? That's a whole other issue. But, you know, let's make sure that our student who was very social doesn't lose that, because that's such an important part of education. If I hadn't known that student so well, you know, he had been in my class for, actually, this was his second year with me, so I knew him very well. This might not have even come up, but I was concerned, and I want my students to succeed. And so, whoops. The best teachers are ones who are consistently responsive, who consistently recognize changes, consistently show children, I'm paying attention, right? Sometimes I worry about that with my own stepkids. Are we showing them enough attention? Is everyone showing them enough attention, or are they being left aside because they don't cause a problem? And I think this is when kids, maybe like yourselves, I know kids like me, kind of fall through the cracks because they learn that they won't get negative attention from a teacher. And they're not going to make waves if they don't speak out. And so we don't. But sometimes we need our teachers more than we know. And this is why responsiveness and sensitivity is so important. Oh, and I love this. I wish we could actually talk about this because this is something I brought up. I'm curious what you all think about this. So just take a minute. I might ask this to be part of your exit ticket, but there are a lot of theorists that believe risky play is critically important to the development of young children. And some of this is climbing, some of this involves rough and tumble play, but play that comes at the risk of injury, right? Difficult because as early childhood educators, one of our main responsibilities is to keep children safe, right? And that's difficult if we're trying to introduce risky play. So take a minute, and I want you to think about, do you think that taking risks is good for children, or do you think it puts them in too much danger? And I'm curious, why do you feel this way? And, you know, all of you are currently in placements right now. If you're in an early childhood center, you probably see more opportunities for risky play than if you're in a classroom. Classrooms, you don't have as much time, and I imagine you're not even with the students during that time. That doesn't mean it isn't important or is important. And think about this, even if you have to think about your own comfort level, because we can only push so far on ourselves. If you are someone who is naturally anxious, nervous, not a risk taker, it's probably going to be very difficult for you to engage or allow your students to engage in risk-taking behavior. But then comes the question, is there room for some risk-taking? What would be an example of that? If it were me, so something that I've done in my classrooms, less risky, definitely more planned risk, creating obstacle courses. This is actually something I did with my occupational therapist and speech and language pathologist. They would have co-treatment sessions in my classroom, which were great. There were times when I could do my own assessment and no longer be the lead. but it was a mixture of, some more language, less active activities, but then they would go from maybe the story to they would oh my gosh, my words. Then we would make an obstacle course. Creating an obstacle course in your classroom allows a tiny bit of risk. Creating an outdoor obstacle course allows for even more risk. There's a bit more furniture in the classroom to be worried about, so we have some things to consider. But that's one way to start to include risk taking. But sometimes I do think we're so afraid of what might happen. We shelter children so much they don't get opportunities to learn what is and isn't safe, because oftentimes natural consequences are the best learning strategy. All right, teacher sensitivity. So if we're going to, and again, think about my examples, if we're going to offer risky play, then we also need to make sure students are comfortable when they're in our care and trust us. The obstacle course was exciting, but also it worked because children trusted us, especially those who weren't the biggest risk takers, because there were plenty, to still complete the activity because they knew these teachers are trying to do something fun. But in order for that to happen, they do need someone that they trust. And that often becomes the teacher or teaching assistant. If you've taken child growth and development, you should know what a secure base is, but it's usually someone who has this responsive attachment with a child. And what happens in infant toddler rooms, if it's truly an infant room, there will be a primary caregiver assigned to that infant. It doesn't always happen if we have high ratios or if infants and toddlers are combined, which does happen frequently. But having that secure base is what allows children the ability to explore. And the secure base is there to provide comfort. So say the child engages in something risky, they can go back if they've hurt themselves and know that there was someone there to comfort them if something happened. Reassurance, you can do this, let's tell this child they have the skills to do what they want to do. Similarly, encourage them to take risks, encourage them of their, that they are allowed to do these things. Because sometimes it's also, are we allowed to do this or not? Yeah. And then think about it. Do you think that these children see this caregiver as a secure base based on the picture? I think it's a little tough. It does seem like the baby here is very close to the adult looking at other children. So it's likely this is a secure base. Unsure, but I think she is providing touch, but comfort, sensitive touch to the child to make them feel like they are cared for. Excuse me. So as I've talked about this already, sensitivity is about not just responding, but responding consistently and using effective ways to respond. And that also means if you're going to be effective in your responses, like I said, you know the child, right? If you're planning, so here are some examples of some really great teacher sensitivity. If you're planning a sand exploration activity, you might know one or two children in the classroom have some anxiety about touching sand. I mean, that's true of adults, right? There are a lot of people who love sand and a lot of people who have aversion to sand. But if I'm a teacher, I know this already, and rather than forcing or seeming like the expectation is to put your hands in the sand, I might say, knowing my students, oh, here's some tongs, here's some tools you can play with in the sand so that you don't have to touch it. I do believe we should slowly expose students to things that they are averse to, but I also think that that is not something that we start doing now. We are still trying to make sure children feel safe exploring. And if you're the new teacher, you especially want them to feel safe. And then eventually with their own kind of, let's say, go ahead, you'll see when it's time to kind of test them. Let's move on. So here's a question. Why do you think, we've talked a little bit about what responsive teaching and teacher sensitivity is. I've shared some examples, but take a minute. Why is being aware and responsive to children so important? I mean, and it is because they have the secure base. They can explore, make mistakes, get hurt, but have someone they know, because that's part of it is children are attentive to us as well. And if there is someone that consistently is available, accessible, and immediately attends to the child in difficult situations, then they know that they're cared for and they can explore, feeling okay to explore, knowing that if something happens, there's someone there. That also makes them more comfortable sharing. I know that, even as adults, if we're in a new class, we're going to be very uncomfortable speaking out unless you're a certain, I'm a type of personality that will. But if you're someone who has that anxiety, you're likely not going to speak out immediately until you know the students and the teacher and you're comfortable. It's so much the same when we're talking about young children, just to a greater degree. So teacher sensitivity and developing these close relationships where you know your children and you can respond when they need you are critically important. So something that does help is being prepared for when a child might not respond in the expected ways. So if you're assigning a classroom job, you might say, I know a lot of friends want to be line leader. We're going to make sure everyone has a turn. Remember, if you don't get picked today, you will get a chance before long. Now, what I will also say when I've done jobs, I make sure that I keep track. So I would do jobs for a week and I would just use my phone and take a picture of the jobs that week so I could remember. So, I'd never remember from week to week. That's crazy. I know myself well. But instead, I know and I can say, I'm sorry, so-and-so, you were line leader last week. You need to choose a new job. So some of that is also you track yourself and find other ways. And if you say each job holds for a week and then we change and then you don't have that job again until everyone else has had a chance, that's the rule. And that definitely can avoid issues with children not feeling like they're getting an opportunity, right? Oh, again, another one I want you to do yourself. So when a student is having a hard time reaching a goal, understanding a concept, a question, or completing an activity, you will need to provide the scaffolding. We know what scaffolding is, right? We're trying to get to that zone of proximal development. Someone said that to me the other day. I don't remember who. Was it my brother? Anyways, we're trying to get to the zone of proximal development. And doing so, which is kind of the amount that we know that kids can learn or the extent that they can learn with support. And so we need to provide that support. So what do we do if a child, so here's an example. A child is playing with blocks and is frustrated that the tower keeps falling down. Does that happen a lot? What scaffolding strategies would you use to keep the blocks from falling? Or let me start that again. Think about how you would scaffold to help that child. One, keep the blocks from falling, but also not become so discouraged if something keeps happening. So take a minute, write these down. So I want to know your examples. I'm going to ask, this will be an exit ticket question, the activities. But one example might be asking a prompting question to the child. So, what do you think would happen if we didn't build a tower quite so tall? And then I'm curious, have you ever employed any of these strategies that you've used in the field? Include that. I'll probably ask you to include that next. So here are some other behaviors that can reflect teacher sensitivity. Oh, cute, right? Which is what we're trying to do, nurture. So being attentive, right? Working with infants. Some teachers may be more attentive to children during different activities or times of day. Some teachers may be more aware of feeding schedules or cues. Again, this is why a primary caregiver strategy is important. However, the other important part is that not all children are going to present the same cues, right? So that is, again, why it's so important to know the behaviors of your students so that you can respond appropriately. But being attentive is very important, and it doesn't mean that you have to be on top of or next to the children, but you should be aware of what is happening with them throughout the day. Anticipate. So sometimes it is when you're planning a lesson and you know that there's going to be an issue. You plan ahead so that the issues or challenges experienced are reduced. I'm trying to think, I wish I had a good example. My best are that when I knew we were going to have long transition times, I always knew, again, which students were going to be, one, dismissed earlier from that transition to the next activity. Two, while students were waiting, because I knew it was so difficult, I tried to play fun, easy games in the hallway quietly. But that was one way that we managed the problem of waiting during transitions. And something else, and this is, I mean, I've become more adept at this as an old, working with older populations, but that doesn't mean that won't happen otherwise.
The signs that a child isn't understanding. We can't do exit tickets in preschool, so you have to find another way, right? And it might be if you see kind of the expressions of a confused child, find a nice way to take them aside and ask them to demonstrate their knowledge in a low stakes way. But be aware of those signs because your students will show them to you. And now here are some kind of specific behaviors of responsiveness. Tune in, respond to children's bids for verbal and nonverbal attention. So again, we have, when we're talking about either nonverbal students or infants and toddlers developing language, they'll use gestures. They will, sometimes it's just orienting and giving a look. Pay attention to that. When you are working with children who are nonverbal, it is even more important to be responsive so they learn they can receive support from adults. You can check in frequently, look at their body language. If you think a child is having trouble processing or expressing their thoughts, find alternative ways. Something that is not here that I will bring up next week. There are two kind of versions. There's the amazing 5-point scale, and there are the zones of regulation. I think when we're talking about both teacher sensitivity and responsiveness, since emotions are so closely tied to this, I think when we do have these moments where we're struggling with emotions and how to express them, we got to bring in additional tools for our students who aren't verbal. And the amazing 5-point scale and zones of regulation kind of offers that. But the idea being you as a teacher are extremely aware to how your different students are going to bid or make attempts for your attention and not. And that means they're going to do things that are nonverbal, and you need to be attentive and aware of that. Ugh, I do find frustration because I've seen a lot of adults struggle with being understanding. Um, Sometimes we confuse responsiveness with interrupting. We hear a student trying to communicate something to us, and we interrupt to finish the sentence. But we're not helping the student that way because we're not teaching them how to communicate their needs. We're teaching them that we can read their minds. And sometimes we're not always right. So what I would highly recommend is to give your students time, wait, do not interrupt. Even if you know what they're going to ask you, give them the opportunity to ask the full question. We really have to stop interrupting students when we think we know what they need, because it doesn't allow them the practice to ask for what they need. And also, if we're teachers and we're busy, we get upset if students don't notice that we're busy, but you know what? They're still learning how to be attentive to their environment and their surroundings. We can't be mad at them for having a skill they really shouldn't be expected to have yet. That's us being upset that we can't handle the stress. And it is not our students' fault. So that's my piece for that. Student comfort. This means that students are being supported at high levels. They're comfortable, they share their needs with the teacher. This might be they seek support. They freely approach materials activities. They're not afraid to try new things. They're willing to share ideas. I mean, these are the behaviors that show us a teacher has created a positive learning environment and students are comfortable. That's what you're always looking for. Sometimes it's also indicative of how much are students participating. The more students, the more often, and the sheer quantity, the more students that participate, the better you're doing with teacher sensitivity, with teacher responsiveness, and allowing your students to be comfortable in the classroom. Excuse me, my coughing is coming back. So to kind of sum up, here are some kind of specific strategies you can use to put into practice, either at your current setting or not. If you don't already do that, listen, acknowledge children's feelings, frustrations, and stories. This is where paraphrasing and restating can be very helpful, making sure they know that you're listening. Like I said before, take your time interacting. We feel rushed because we're busy teachers, but students don't really know that, and they shouldn't be expected to know that. And this is true regardless of teacher sensitivity. Your praise should always be specific. Good job means nothing. If a child, I've done a lot of great waiting because that was always, an objective for my students, is just to be able to wait. And I wouldn't just say good job if I saw my student waited. I'd say, what nice work you did waiting. I love seeing you waiting so patiently, because waiting is a part of life. So I find that to be how I mean, we all talk about that in education in general, not just early childhood. Positive guidance. So sometimes that also means positive redirection. That's why instead of schools saying no running, we try to say walking feet, because that, one, tells children what to do, tells children what they can do instead of what they can't do. And sometimes students will need assistance. It might be a prompt, encouragement, anything to help a child who might be forgetful, as we all are, about rules. And that we should model this. So I think the best thing teachers do, I mean, that's something we always did in my classrooms, is exaggerating social situations and highlighting these pro-social behaviors that we want to model in front of students. All right, and then lastly, this is kind of your last, this will be kind of your last activity and exit ticket is watch this video and tell me, how sensitive is this teacher? Focus on the lesson. What are students learning? Do you think she's effective in what she's trying to communicate with them? What were signs that there was a positive climate? What did she miss? And are there any tips that you might share for making this experience better? All right. That's the end of that. Oh no, you can see what I was watching. Yeah, sorry, I do have my reality TV. So I'm going to post this, and then once you finished watching, complete the exit ticket. It will be based on activities that were in the video, okay? Nothing surprising. Thank you for listening. Bye.